Hey readers, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while, so if you're new here, my name is Bailey, also known as Well-Read PhD, here on Instagram and on Substack. And in this video, I will be reviewing every single book that I read in the month of May. Basically, I'll give you a quick rundown of what the book is about with as few spoilers as possible, give you some of my favorite and least favorite bits of the book, and then finally rating them on a scale of masterpiece to meh. I was traveling a lot this month and finished 10 books, and I am so excited to tell you what I think about them today. If you're curious as to what I've been reading from January until now, I have recaps of those on my Substack, which I will link in the video description below. Without further ado, let's get into it. Instead of ordering this chronologically, I'm going to just take you from my favorite reads to my least favorite reads of May. And my favorite book of May was Women Seated by Zhang Yueran. In order to broaden my literary horizons, I am trying to read from 50 different countries this year that are not the US or the UK. Now you might say, Bailey, why are you still reading things from Ireland or Australia or Canada? And that's a fair point because I read a lot of Irish literature, but I think in general, the literary market is pretty dominated from the US and the UK, and to be way more specific, New York and London. So, laying out that reasoning and also all of that aside, I picked this up because it was written by a Chinese author and set in China. This book follows Yuling, who is a nanny for an elite Chinese family in Beijing, and she cares for their only son, Quan. Yuling has a sort of unsavory past, and so of course she is trying to keep this hidden while she is working for this family. But when the tides turn politically on this rich family, there's a lot of turmoil. I don't really want to get into too many specifics. Yuling has to sort of figure out what she's going to do with this son, Quan, and also what she's going to do herself. Is this an opportunity for her to improve her circumstances? Is this an opportunity to stand by the family? Basically, how will this shake out for Yuling? Now, when you start the book and you first meet Yuling and Quan, you think that you're going to get some sort of nanny domestic type thriller. So I'm thinking of like The Tokyo Suite by Giovanna Mataloso, or The Perfect Nanny by Leila Slimani, or Clean by Alia Trabuco Zeron. That is kind of what you get for the first 20% of this book, but it turns into something that is not that at all. I don't know if this is going to be for everyone. I loved how instead of going to that formulaic domestic thriller space, it turns instead into this quietly unfolding, but still super tense and still super taut and simmering with what is going to happen. Examination of these women who are in different circumstances, mostly Yuling and her interior life, but also the women that she interacts with and how each of them are trapped within a system and how do they navigate that system. Well, of course, I expected class commentary between like there's this rich woman in Beijing and here's her domestic help, but I thought it went further than that. It went through gendered expectations, it went through agency, it went through how can you figure out how to change your life within certain rigid confines that really weren't ever decided for you. And I really, really loved it. I think that Zhang writes with a precision that is painterly, that is so thoughtful. Like every detail that she includes will get circled back to, and it all builds to this not super satisfying conclusion, but like realistic conclusion that I just think is really smart, and I would love to go back and reread it. On a rating scale of masterpiece to meh, this was a masterpiece. I gave this a 4.75 out of 5 stars. I am a very picky 5-star giver. I think I've given 1 or 2 this entire year, and I think there was something in the translation or narration that kept me at a bit of an arm's distance from Yuling, which in some places seemed very intentional, and in other places didn't work as well for me. But I wholeheartedly recommend this if you like any sort of character study or examination of women's interiority and class. My second favorite book of May was Dancing in the Mosque by Homeira Qaderi. This is a book for my reading around the world for Afghanistan. It is a memoir in translation written as a letter from Homeira Qaderi to her son. You find out immediately that Qaderi has immigrated elsewhere, but her son remains in Afghanistan, and she does not know if she will ever get to see him again. This traces Qaderi's life from childhood, growing up under the Taliban, under Russian regimes, under the US takeover, and then through various different extremist groups. And at first, I had to take a break from it. I was listening to it on audio, and it's not exactly one of those books that I would just put on while I'm running errands or dropping my newly at the UPS or something. I think it demands a lot of concentration, but I do think it is an incredible memoir. Of course, it is hard to read in parts. Like anytime you read anything about someone who grows up under a military and or religious regime, like there is going to be a lot of trauma. And there is basically every trigger and content warning imaginable. So I would definitely check Storygraph for that. But it's honest. I didn't ever feel like it was trauma porny. I never felt like, the purpose of this story was to trot out every bad thing and just really wallow in that. I thought it was like, yeah, because this happened, this is what drove my next action. As someone who was born in the 90s, I was pretty young when the US invaded Afghanistan. And so I don't have a fully informed understanding of what really happened. Everything has been, highly politicized or academicized. I don't know if you have encountered a similar media understanding of Afghanistan, but for me, it was really refreshing to be able to read an Afghan perspective from an Afghan woman specifically. I don't think I've ever read an Afghan woman before, except for Padmina Sabit's Good People that just came out last month, which I recap in my April Substack, but that was fictional. So to have a nonfiction perspective was really heartening. Qaderi pushed back on the idea that like women were without agency or helpless. She actually has this through line throughout the narrative that like she had choices she could make. There were pockets of resistance in communities, even while they were occupied by foreign troops, where they had networks of resistance, where they found ways to educate each other and to communicate to each other. And I really, really loved that. This was a masterpiece for me. I give it a 4.5 out of 5, mainly just because there were definitely points that were more plot heavy versus like attention to style. But all in all, I think it's an incredible nonfiction read and would definitely recommend you pick up on audio if you can, just so you can hear the correct Pashto and Dari pronunciations. Book number 3 is Return to Blood by Michael Bennett. This is the second book in the Hannah Westerman series, which is one of my reads from New Zealand, which is written by a Maori author featuring a Maori detective. So I definitely recommend you read the first book, Better the Blood, first before you go into the sequel. Otherwise, you will be a bit confused. But in this second installment, Hannah has left the Auckland police force. She is grappling with the fact that she is Maori and that she was a police officer and how she has been complicit in a system that oppresses Maori people. So she hangs up her badge and she moves back to her hometown, a small seaside Maori community. And of course, when she returns to her seaside idyllic hometown, she cannot catch a break. She is trying to win her way back into the Maori community. Her extended family and cousins and network of care who largely didn't love that she was a cop for a very long time. And so she's having to navigate winning their trust back while also trying to navigate, yes, I'm Maori, but I don't want bad things to happen to Maori people. And so being part of a police force seems to me the best way forward or the best way to have representation on that police force, which, I think she sort of goes back and forth with this moral dilemma of like where she wants to fall and how she wants justice or utu to be meted. And I think there's a really thoughtful and nuanced discussion of that. This in general was a really realistic mystery. There were some threads that didn't come together for me until the end, which as an armchair detective is a lot. I can usually clock pretty early on what's going on, but I really liked this book. I'm not sure if it was as fresh or had the staying power as the first mystery, but I really enjoyed it. Really, really solid, especially for a sequel. It was not a sophomore slump at all. I gave this a must-read rating of 4 out of 5. Whew. Book 4 is a doozy. Book 4 is Treasure Island with 3 exclamation points by Sara Levine. All of these weird girl versus the void, 20-something crash out books out there, hold my beer. This is truly one of the more deranged ones I have read, and I have read a lot of those. This book follows a 20-something girl crashing out because she, for some reason, has decided that the book Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island is divinely inspired and meant for her. And so she is now redesigning her entire life around what she has identified as the four core values. Values are boldness, resolution, independence, and horn blowing. Obviously, disastrous results ensue. This is unhinged, and I do not say this lightly. I had read Levine's second novel, The Hitch, for book club in March, which I will link to that review here. And I found it okay, but I found it like unhinged for unhinged sake. And similarly, this was off its rocker. I think the dialogue is hilarious. I think there are some choices that you are literally just like, what are you doing, as you watch the main character just dig and dig this hole of like ruining her life. But it is very entertaining. I think the ending is too fast for me, and I wish there had been a little more self reflection on the main character's part, because she is genuinely just like a shitstorm running around up everyone's lives. But for me, I think the voice of the main character, who is, let's be clear, a very horrendous person, carries it, because it is just so thick and stupid, but so funny. And I laughed out loud on the plane reading this several times. So I gave this a must read rating. I don't know if I'm going to remember this as something super profound. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 because the plot could be fleshed out. I think it could be a little more balanced. I think it cuts off a little too quickly for me at the end, but it is so freaking funny. Number 5 of May was Call and Response by Gothataone Moeng. This was a short story collection from a Botswanan author set in contemporary Botswana. And of course, I read it for my Reading Around the World for Botswana. If you read my Substack, you know that I have a Sisyphean struggle with short story collections where I really want to be a short story girly, mainly because I have found in my Reading Around the World that sometimes it is easier to find a short story collection and translation than a full novel from countries that don't receive a lot of translation or publication attention, which was also the case here. I could not find a novel set in Botswana, and so I opted for this. This is definitely more of a character study versus plot driven short story collection, which I don't mind. I enjoyed that we were thinking about how Botswana, as a relatively new and relatively small country, still reeling from colonization's effects, is trying to navigate modernity and tradition and what that even means in the life of ordinary Botswanan families and, for the most part, ordinary Botswanan women. I loved that most of these voices we got were women centric, especially because the one story I can remember with the male main character, early life and education, needed to be about half its length. It was not my fave. Some standout stories for sure. I really liked The First Virginity of Gigi Sara, and I really liked Small Wonders, which is about a young widow who is navigating this sort of tribal expectation to wear mourning clothes, with like the fact that she has to go to work every day and navigate her own grief. And how do you take the bus to work in your mourning clothes that were expected from your dead husband's tribe? And what does that mean to you? There's some really beautiful turns of phrase and realistic dialogue throughout the stories, but I think overall I would give it a maybe. I would still read something else from this author. I'd give this a 3.5 out of 5. It was more good than bad. Was fighting a losing battle with me because it was a short story collection, but more so I found myself wanting more variety in the narrative voices. I felt like a lot of them blended together and didn't feel super unique in their perspectives. So I think if there'd been a little more levels to characterization, and honestly, if Moeng had cut that entire story about the early life and education, I think I would have liked this better. But if you like a short story collection and if you like to learn more about Southern Africa, I think this would be a good fit for you. All right, we are halfway there. Book 6 of May is Undiscovered by Gabriela Wiener. This was my Read Around the World pick for Peru. This was another memoir, so maybe I would call it creative nonfiction. The book starts with the author, Gabriela Wiener, walking through a Parisian collection of Peruvian artifacts that were, unquote, discovered by Charles Wiener, who, as you might notice, is Wiener's great great grandfather. potentially. Charles Wiener was an Austrian colonial explorer who almost rediscovered Machu Picchu and essentially took a lot of indigenous artifacts for colonial study from South America back to Europe. And somewhere in his timeline, though it was not super well documented in the archives, if you could imagine, had an illegitimate child with a Peruvian, most likely indigenous woman. But while Gabriela Wiener is in this museum space, she is also still reeling from the loss of her father, who was the link genetically to Charles Wiener. What follows is a bunch of sort of vignette-ish reflections on colonialism, colonial lineage, what it means for Gabriela Wiener to be descended both from indigeneity and being a Peruvian woman and a descendant of a colonizer, and how she wrestles with that, and also how she wrestles with her own family history. We find out pretty early on in the book that Gabriela's father had a secret family. And so there's infidelity that she's also wrestling with and thinking about, well, yeah, well, my ancestors would have been a secret family. And so, like, is this part of my colonial heritage to be this sort of secret? I think when Wiener is writing about her heritage and this colonial past and thinking through repatriation, indigeneity, is when she's at her strongest. I think she is a powerhouse writer. She does not hold any punches. And I really, really enjoyed that. What rankled with me was the thread of this book where her used her family history to justify some of her actions. So, what I mean by this is Wiener is openly writing as a queer and polyamorous woman in a non monogamous relationship living in Spain. Cool. You do you. Your sexuality and your sex life does not bother me. I don't care about that. What I do care is about you saying, oh, I'm ethically non monogamous, but I'm also cheating on both my partners while I'm in a different country, and saying, well, it's in my blood, right? Like my great great grandfather was a colonizer and he had a secret family. And then my dad was unfaithful and had a secret family. So, like, yeah, is this just part of my lineage? And I am not trying to read this in bad faith, but there were several times where this line of logic argument was iterated and I just did not buy it. And it was kind of a lazy justification of your own actions, right? Like you're not taking any accountability for cheating on people because you're like, oh, well, it's because of my great great grandfather Charles. Like, no, you have a kid. Come on. Aside from that thread, I really enjoyed it. But I did not enjoy that thread. So I feel like in total, I would give this a maybe rating of a 3.5. I think it's a good nonfiction memoir pick if you're like a strangers or fame sick girly who wants, like, you know, sort of juicy what's going on cheating scandal. All in all, I felt like that angle really undermined the stronger material in the book. All right, book 7. This one will be quick. So this was Carved in Blood by Michael Bennett. This is third in the Hannah Vesterman series, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a police procedural series set outside of Auckland, New Zealand, by a Maori author and with a Maori detective. I think if you've read the first two, all you need to know before you go into this book is that it is going to be a development of Hannah and company's various stories. Do not read the book blurb at all. It gives away the entire summary and I think really, really undermines the plot of the book. And I hate when publishers do this. I think there's a lot of really significant developments that happen in this third book, relationship wise. I think there are some really sad parts in this book and some really interesting turns. I don't want to give too much away, but I do think that some of the time jump and some of the character development felt a bit unearned in certain relationships after reading the second book. I read them back to back and I just was like, wow, the first two were awesome and this third one really petered out. I am excited to see where the next book takes us. And so I will probably read the next one. And if it doesn't work for me, then I might call it quits from there. But I do think it is a maybe if you like the rest of the series and if you like a police procedural. 8 in May was Boring Asian Female by Canwen. This is another one of those unhinged narrator reads. Elizabeth Zhang is obsessed with percentiles. She is constantly saying that her friends are an X percentile of attractiveness or ambition or intellect. And so she sees the world in a very black and white way. So she is at Columbia and she has one goal in life, and it is to go to Harvard Law School. And when she does not get in, but a classmate that she thinks is below her in all of these percentiles does get in, she becomes obsessed with this classmate, Laura, and tries to figure out what about her stood out to Harvard on her application that made Elizabeth seem like an unquote boring Asian female. I think this book will work for most people. It's pulpy, it's campy, it's sort of beach read thriller in that you know that this narrator is just going to dig herself deeper and deeper into the hole. It engages with affirmative action and meritocracy and admissions quotas and just the sort of weird up system of modern day academia in some ways that are smart and in some ways that are just a little obvious. It's just like, oh, this is bad. And it's like, well, yeah, it is. But also at the same time, I was not rooting for Elizabeth. She made some choices that were cuckoo bananas, for lack of a better term. And unlike in Treasure Island, where you know from the jump that this person is insane and boring Asian female, she tries to play Elizabeth as like a straight woman. Like she's just like, yeah, this is how it is. This is how I'm going to do it. If you liked Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, this is a really good comp for that. I just found it to be a little predictable, and I just wish there was like a little more subtlety involved. I just thought it was a little too obvious in some of its critiques, and some of the relationships were a little out of left field and didn't really add to the story. I give this a maybe a 3 out of 5 is sort of where I'm landing. I didn't find the writing style that great. I thought the dialogue was pretty clunky and cringy. I think I might just be aging out of college age narrators. I don't know, girl. Why do you want to go to Harvard? There was no clear like impetus beyond this just like fixation on Harvard. No, it just didn't land for me in the way that I think the author meant it to. If you like a young, fun, timely, plot-driven beach read, and you really liked Yellowface by R.F. Kuang or Colored Television by Dancy Senna, then I think this might work really well for you. Girls, book 9, really to the ones that I did not care for down here. So book 9 is Helpless by Jessica Knoll. This is a new release, and I did get this one as an ARC on NetGalley, so thank you to the publisher for giving me that chance to review it in exchange for an honest review. And here is the honest review, girls. Basically, this started off as a sort of return to college mystery. You're following Faye, who is a Hollywood screenwriter and maybe starlet. It was a little unclear to me what she was doing out there in Hollywood some of the time. But basically, she gets news that one of her beloved theater professors and the one who really helped her get her start in the industry has passed away. And it seems to be under increasingly more suspicious circumstances. So she returns to her college town for his funeral. And of course, she reconnects with her toxic ex-boyfriend, Henry. I think that's his name. She connects with him. Spoiler, just like he was abusive in the old days, he is also abusive right now. And so he kidnaps Faye and puts her in the woods. Great. I thought this was going to be a thriller. I loved Jessica Knoll's past book, Bright Young Women, which was a 5-star read for me. It was a retelling of the Florida State Chi Omega murders that happened, but from the sorority women's perspective. And it was chef's kiss, incredible, feminist, about women and solidarity and moving forward after trauma and all of these really incredible topics. This book would not pass the Bechdel test on a single page, and it infuriated me. Apparently, this is billed as an erotic thriller. I thought it was just going to be a thriller, and I just thought like, okay, he kidnaps her and now she's trying to escape. But no, resume their weird relationship. And also, they're both insufferable. I was truly rooting for no one. This was billed as an erotic thriller, which I did not know when I received the ARC. I thought it was just a thriller slash mystery. I would say that the percent breakdown of erotic to thriller was like 10% thriller, 90% erotic. These people are just all the time. She's just thinking about how they used to fuck in the past. She's just like thinking about how she wants him to fuck her in all these crazy ways. There were parts of this story that were so open door and so out of pocket for the plot that I literally was like, what am I reading? One point, this man has her vacuum up crumbs from the dinner table with her mouth. You know what? I'm not kink shaming anyone. I'm not slut shaming anyone. Whatever you want to read and whatever gets you off, your business. I will say that what infuriated me is that this previous book, Bright Young Women, had such a great message. Like, despite sexual violence, like finding ways to grieve and to process trauma and to move on. And this book did an entire 180. Like, I could not tell you what message I was supposed to get about Faye and Henry's relationship. Was it that rape is cool? Was it that consent doesn't matter? Was it that a survivor's account can never be trusted because it's been fictionalized, or if it's been publicized that it's been sensationalized to fit a certain narrative? Was it genuinely pissed me off so bad that I was just hate reading it at that point? And I do not recommend. I think this is a meh, which I would give like a 2.5 out of 5. I will tell Jessica Knoll, Jessica, you write really well. And that is why I loved your second book, Bright Young Women. You have a great gift of language and of painting a picture, but you did it in the name of what? Justifying abusive relationships, romanticizing that abuse? That to me was not cool. Anyway, read pretty much any other thriller instead. This was absolute trash. And finally, book 10. Sorry, I'm still riled up about Helpless, man. If you thought that I could not dislike a book more than Helpless, you would be wrong, because I will say that Helpless at least gave me something to think about and be mad about and remember. Book 10 did not evoke any of those feelings in me because it was, as they say, go on, girl, give us nothing coded. This was Sadvertising by Ennis Cehic. This was my read around the world for a Bosnian author from Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is a collection of punchy short stories and flash fiction that are centered around the sort of advertising firm milieu. Like, if you worked in creative advertising or in marketing or in copywriting, like, revolves around a bunch of fictional people at various advertising, marketing, copywriting firms that are talking about their everyday life. And some of it goes into magical realism territory or dreamscape territory. Some are just super hyper realistic. I cannot tell you a single thing that happened in this book. I will say this may have been another case of short story collection does not work for me, but I thought it would be good. I thought it would be fun and punchy and quippy. I thought, some of these stories are 3 pages long, a page long. Like, let's read them. Let's see what's going on. And reader, I had to force myself to like read a 3-page story. I had to be like, come on, Bailey, you just got to get through this. This was not a long book. This did not work for me. It was so quippy and punchy and zingy that it didn't really have anything to say. And it kind of, I think, could have been a meta depiction of how advertising doesn't really have that much to say. But it was a parade of stories that I could not tell you a single thing that happens, except for the fact that like they're in cubicles. But I could not tell you a plot point. I could not tell you a character's name. I could not tell you a journey or transformation that happened. I don't know if it's because they all just blurred together or because I was just having such a bad time reading it that I was just like clocked out mentally. But I really just think it was that these short stories were not balanced or nuanced enough for me. So there were times where it would just hit you over the head with a moral. I remember feeling, because I can't remember specifics. And there were other times where it just felt like we took off and I thought it was going somewhere. And then the plane was just like circling and we never landed the plane. There was no point. I would get to the end of a story and be like physically dissatisfied and be like, that's it. And so, yeah, while I disliked Helpless for many reasons above, it made me think about something, man. I don't know. I don't know if I would recommend this. I think that it did not stick with me hardly at all. And when it comes to sort of like corporate work life, I think you're much better off reading Discontent by Beatrice Serrano or reading Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasulki, which I think go a little deeper and do land the plane a little more. I would give this one a 2.5 out of 5 or a meh. So those are the 10 books that I read in May. If you want more of the nitty-gritty details, you can always follow me on Substack because I have written reviews there. And you can follow me on Instagram so you can get all of those notifications when a new Substack or a new YouTube video drops. I am hoping to do more of these because I have this new fuzzy microphone, so I got to use it. So, of course, if you like this video, hit subscribe, hit like, drop a comment telling me which reviews you enjoyed or which books you're adding to your TBR, which books I should add to my TBR, especially for reading around the world. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you in the next one.